Keynote by Professor Joshua Ellul.
Good afternoon, everyone. So what I'd really like to achieve in this talk is setting the scene for the upcoming panel on decentralized social media. And I know a lot of you are probably very well versed in the blockchain, in the Web3 space, but still I know that some of you are not so versed. If we look at Web 1.0, it was all about read-only content, the ability to go to a website, get some data from this particular website. And for those of you that are as old as me here, you remember sites like this, where we could go to Yahoo and find information. We could even order a pizza using a simple interface, which was great. And if you wanted to create your own content, you would have to learn HTML, upload this HTML onto a server, and tell your friends where they can find it. Great days, new technology, awesome, but it was limited to those that could use this technology and maintain this technology. And the main issue about these types of sites were that they were controlled by the users. So if we really think about decentralization, the web in its infancy had decentralization in mind. Users controlling their content, sharing it with the world. The problem was they were non-trivial. It required a lot of effort to create these sites and maintain them. Then, in around early 2000s, mid-2000s, the Web 2.0 era came. Make it easier for all people to share their content with the world. And this is where Facebook emerged, YouTube, Medium, all the great sites that we use nowadays. Now, the thing about these types of sites is that you required zero tech know-how, and you could suddenly share your content with everyone. Awesome. However, this came with the caveat that now these centralized providers had control over the content, they had control over the algorithm. And what that meant was they could make money on the user's data and the user's content, number one. Number two, it meant that they could control public narratives. If you go back towards COVID and you go back towards any incident you want to think about, whether you agree with their stance or not, the truth is they could control the public narratives in regards to what people started to believe in the world and censor other narratives. Now, around the same time, Bitcoin emerged. And I'm sure that you are all happy to be in the Bitcoin space right now. And what did Bitcoin propose? The decentralization of monetary systems. Awesome. So this is happening the same time that decentralized social media platforms emerge. And this led to a movement to decentralize not just monetary systems, but all types of other digital systems with platforms like Ethereum and other types of blockchains coming out that we won't go into. Now, this brings us then to this new era of trying to disintermediate these large platforms that emerged. And what I want to cover right here are the three main types of decentralized social media platforms that have been proposed. At the, let's say, most decentralized spectrum of our platforms, we have peer-to-peer platforms requiring, if you want to share content, you run your own node, you run your own computer, and you share content with who you want to share it with. However, this means you are responsible for the content you share, you're responsible for the content that you not only create, but share on behalf of other users. And that's excellent. However, if you're responsible and you need to maintain a computer, you need some tech savviness. Slightly less decentralized are the blockchain-based ones. And it's ironic that I say slightly decentralized when I talk about blockchain. So in our peer-to-peer networks, our users individually run computers, and they individually govern the algorithms that control the content. In the blockchain-based social media ones, the community collectively governs the network. So now we have to agree to consensus mechanisms to decide which content should be censored, removed, or whatever. And then at the most decentralized spectrum of the decentralized social media platforms, we have our federated platforms. And what the federated platforms try to do is say, some centralization is good. So let's allow for anyone that wants to operate like Facebook or Instagram to operate like Facebook or Instagram. But they all have to work together in this single network. And as a user, I will decide which instance operator I will subscribe to. Now, it's another great solution because it takes away some of the decentralized woes that we have with using the technology, requiring users to not have to worry about some of the technology under the hood. Now, if we consider the peer-to-peer networks, whilst they're great, they have one problem. Since all the computers need to connect to each other, since if I am your friend, I need to connect to your computer and get your data, if your computer's offline, I can't get your data. So they tend to lack from efficiency and they tend to lack from availability. Now, to get around this, some centralization points have been introduced to get around these inefficiencies. And they work well in the grand scheme of things, but indeed, they introduce centralized points to get around these inefficiencies. When we come to the blockchain-based ones, in smart contract code, in decentralized code, they define the governance framework. And they guarantee that the governance framework is followed. That's great. Smart contracts execute code faithfully no matter what. But the problem with code that executes faithfully no matter what is that if there is a bug in that code, it will also execute that bug faithfully. So what do we do about that? How do we maintain systems or govern systems that might have a bug in regards to how it's going to censor or control certain content? At the instance operator, at the federated level, whilst these have been the social media platforms that have seen the most uptake, what we've seen in recent studies is that centralized points are emerging. Users are flocking towards the most popular instances. We're ending up with a handful of instances that are, again, the centralized operators. So this is the spectrum of what's being proposed. And whilst decentralization is great, decentralization is a noble cause, we should ask ourselves, when it comes to illegal or unethical activities, are we perfectly fine with just saying decentralize everything? Or do we want some controls? Do we want some regulation? Do we want some rules to stop content that might, let's say, include underage pornography? This is the big question that we have to ask ourselves. Complete decentralization or some form of governance? If we look at the peer-to-peer side, it's up to the user himself to decide which content to share in the network and be responsible for it. Now, if in our governments we say, go after the people that have been sharing this illegal activity, will that scale really well when you have thousands of people sharing illegal activity? It's going to be infeasible to crack down on them. Although we could look at creating barriers inside of our internet infrastructure. When it comes to the blockchain-based community, it's delegated to the community, and the community is collectively responsible for this content, which is great, but again, what do you do when something goes wrong in code? And we're going to touch on this in the panel. When it comes to the federated, this is actually the easiest point to control. When we have a number of instance operators, like Facebook, but Facebook's not in this type of system, that we can go after, then it becomes much easier to control these networks. Now, if a government were to decide to censor a few of these instance operators because they didn't agree with the message, in this type of system, it'd be easy for them to target these few instance operators. So that's really setting the scene for this panel.